All right, howdy, Chris, and what's going on, workforce? Today, I want to dive into a follow-up question that I got on my latest video over on Ginger Prime. The TLDR of that video is Baldur's Gate 3 is set to release here in just about 2 weeks from the time of this recording, and it is an unbelievable rock star level style of a game. This game in and of itself has devs worried that a new expectation will be set for this game going forward. And so I wanted to talk about that, and I did. And I got an interesting comment here, and I'm probably going to butcher the name. We're just going to say, oh no, Smaller Lolcats, who writes, the way I see it, it isn't Baldur's Gate 3 that's setting expectations. It's the $70 price tag. Games haven't been able to justify this price increase, especially when compounded with the rising cost of DLC over the years. What makes matters worse is that the 8th console generation brought an end to the declining game prices over a lifespan, whereas games in previous generations ended around the $40 mark. It has remained consistently in the 60 plus range this time around. Now, I'd push back on that, especially when it comes into sales, but I guess the outside of the sale price, I guess I could see that, but then again, I'm a Game Pass subscriber and I buy a handful of games and I don't even spend $70. I'm weird. I always get like the $100 edition. And we could talk about that, like, if you guys want in another video. But the growing digital market has only made this problem even worse, as price matching agreements mean that everyone has to agree to sales or else it doesn't happen at all. But of course, it's easier to point fingers than to understand. Stardew Valley has as many players as New World and Lost Ark combined right now. Perhaps understanding why one can retain players while others can is something to be looked into. And of course, people are not going to. Can't wait to see all the excuses for Final Fantasy 16 falling out of the top charts later this week and early next. So there's kind of 3 points here, but the main one being the $70 price tag and how that sets a new expectation. And it's so interesting because we've been at that $60 price tag for so long. This isn't the first time. This is actually a consistent, a point of view that I see expressed online, is that $70, it doesn't feel like a $70 game. And my first thought here is, I wonder if there's going to be a time limit on that, because we haven't really lived in the $70 game world for as long as we did the $60 game world. And when it comes down to the things that I see or misconceptions within gaming, this slightly feels just like, oh, this game took 10 years to make. It's going to be 10 years worth of quality and 10 years of this awesome passion and investment, when generally speaking, a game that takes 10 years to make in historical fact means that there was a problem with HR, with staff turnover, with the design of the game and the changes that they want to make, right? So that in and of itself, the $70 feels like, oh, they're asking for more money, I'm going to get a better product. And it doesn't necessarily correlate that in a one-to-one kind of way. And that's where Baldur's Gate 3 comes into play, because just last night I was streaming the game, hanging out and having an absolute blast. Thanks for all who showed up to that random impromptu stream. The likes on that live stream were just absolutely insane. I'm still kind of shocked by it, so thank you guys, and if you enjoyed the VOD of it, I'm glad. We'll see if we can't turn that into some content for everybody here soon. But on that note, though, like the idea that I saw expressed was, this game is so good, the studio has done such an incredible job, I want to give them more money, but I can't. They're not giving me another way to reward them for this work and this passion. And this, to me, all comes down to the concept of this, this battle always between commerce and art. Because you can see here clearly that with, Baldur's Gate 3, Larian has built upon their Divinity Original Sin series into this game to continue that pedigree, to have that experience, to really be firing on all cylinders, where you start to think of that team that's been building up, and now they're at the championship game, leveraging a beloved IP, a known IP, also, Dungeons and Dragons. So they're removing a lot of the guesswork from players who are just absolutely starved for a game. And it ends up, in my mind, being a almost perfect follow-up to something like Elden Ring from last year. And in this case, it feels maybe even a little bit more accessible, because if you aren't into action combat, you're now into turn-based combat, more strategy combat, a slower and more accessible way that you can play with just the mouse if you you want to in this case, and also controller support, which is exciting to see. So thank you guys for that. Now, on that note, the fact that it's coming to PlayStation 5, I think is going to be really interesting, as in a way kind of filling that gap of Starfield not being on PlayStation 5, and you kind of end up having this perfect recipe for an RPG release this year. Right now, it is already starting to shift me from my Game of the Year pick off of Final Fantasy 16, which I'm still working on my playthrough, no spoilers here, guys, into Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of its choice and the options that I have. And this is me from a guy who's always wanted to really get into D&D and never has had the ability to, both as a kid being banned because of the satanic panic that was happening in the late 80s and early 90s around Dungeons & Dragons, and now as an adult with lack of time, even though being able to listen to people's campaigns for Dungeons & Dragons is really very, very exciting. But in terms of this, kind of to bring it all back into full circle with that price tag, yeah, I see that has set expectations higher, but I do want to give and caution that it isn't just as simple as, oh, the devs really just absolutely have to care. I think passion is a key ingredient to the standard project management costs here, but when it comes down to it, when it's all said and done, we're looking at kind of hopefully not a once in a lifetime, but a once in every couple of years, where the studio really wants to make this game, they're passionate about it, they have the funding, and they're able to make it happen. But the question is that should we see more of a scale of prices when it comes to these style of games? I don't honestly know, because if Baldur's Gate 3 is the first game that makes people feel like that $70 price tag is justified, there's going to be a lot of frustration and a lot of kickback across the industry whenever the next $70 game comes out and it doesn't even stand up. And then also, how do you even start to compare certain features for certain features, right? Like, my preference towards RPGs is one thing, but if you're really just into an action game or something like that, you're not going to necessarily get that. So that $70 price point is going to vary by user and also by that player's circumstance at that moment in time. If you have an insane amount of money, $70 probably means nothing to you. But if you're hurting and you're living paycheck to paycheck and you just can't, $70 could be a huge percentage of your take-home pay. And thus, this generation of games feels less inclusive and a little bit more frustrating, which could lead to the obvious frustration. And, in a way, I've always felt like video game scores bring in the cost of a game to a degree, but they never publicly talk about the cost of the game, because my final thought before I wrap up, and we're going to hang out today for the podcast, is that you have Forspoken, which I felt was a $40 game. It was a good game. I enjoyed it. I paid full price for it. I don't regret that. But still, at the end of the day, if you could pick that game up for $40, it's a $40 game. And that's not a bad thing. That's not discounting the game itself. And I think a lot of this ends up being kind of games that end up getting hyped and have an inflated value, that value then decreases much faster, much like markets with bubbles, and games that hold their value over time, much like Nintendo and some obvious cinematic classics in this case, or game classics like Elden Ring. But anyway, Chris, those are my thoughts. I'm looking forward to talking with you today on the podcast. Hopefully everybody who's hanging out for this video and liked it, enjoyed it, and if you did, or you have a topic that you'd like me to see me explore, jump into the comments. I'm looking forward to picking some of those up. And Chris, I'll see you soon.